Hey, we're speaking all things money right now, and this is an important conversation. Raising any child is costly, but when a child has special needs, the financial plan process looks a little bit different. It has a bit of an added layer. Every diagnosis, prognosis, and expectation around life expectancy shapes the plan. And in many cases, the time horizon must extend beyond your own lifetime to include that of your child. Financial planning for a special needs child is therefore both deeply personal and highly specialized. To help us speak on this, Tsungai Masendeke is with us, a certified financial planner and director at IWCP Proventus. Thank you, Tsungai. Welcome on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Benjamin. This is an excellent topic. You guys just started on a roll. Let's do this.
Well, we always have good conversations here on our Money Matters feature, and it's good to have you helping us on this. Financial planning is already complex as an individual when you're on your own, and when you add the layer of children, there's something that is also added as a responsibility there. But, most people don't understand the fact that if you do have a child with disabilities, it doesn't just affect the child's costs, but also your own personal costs that are going to be shaped by the lifestyle you'll be living with that child.
You're spot on, Benjamin. So there are a couple of things that I would love to share with our listeners today that I think are so fundamental in planning for your finances, especially when you have a child with special needs. The first one I would say is budgeting, or what we call money management. A lot of people find it fearful. Some people are scared out of their wits to do a money management exercise. But the true reality is this very important exercise allows you to look at your cash inflows relative to your cash outflows. I always tell clients you cannot manage what you can't monitor. So if you're not monitoring how much is coming in every single month, how much you're actually spending, not only in your own household, but when you also consider the requirements for this special child or the child with special needs, all of a sudden your expenditure balloons, because we're looking at a child who's going to need probably therapy, who's going to need caregivers, who's going to need home alterations, who's going to need private caregivers, who's probably going to need additional allocations to school fees. So unless you can consistently assess what the true cost is, you're going to be setting yourself up for failure. So the key thing I want to encourage our listeners is make sure you understand your money. Make sure you have a money management plan. Make sure that you understand what money is coming in, what money is going out. And I guess a key thing that I would also add to that in terms of managing cash flow is having an emergency fund. Just the other day, I was speaking to a client who's got a child with special needs. They had a seizure. They needed to be taken into hospital quite immediately. They didn't have the funding at that point in time. And obviously, January hit them on a different level. So it's important for people to appreciate that when you have a child with a disability or a child with a special need, it cannot be business as usual. You need a healthy emergency fund, and you need to make sure that you've got reserves that are readily available to ensure that if life happens and if you experience an unforeseen emergency, you are financially prepared for it.
I'm glad that you spoke about the emergency fund, because children in general are walking emergencies. Anything can happen, right? I mean, even able-bodied children or children without special needs, anything can happen at any moment. Now you have to be rushing to the hospital, rush to this, rush to that. But when you have a child with special needs, those emergencies can happen more often and more frequently than you require. So you're saying we should be planning and know which money comes in and comes out. But how do you know which money comes out when you never know when an emergency situation can take place? How do you plan for more emergencies than not?
Great question. And this, I think, also takes me to my second important point of ensuring you've got appropriate medical aid and the right kind of insurances. So if you've got a good medical aid plan, The history of your claims should be readily accessible, which again helps you to monitor and then manage the process, or at least plan a little bit better. So if you've got medical aid, I definitely implore you, make sure you've got gap cover as well. Because what will happen is if your in-hospital expenses run away from you because the specialists are charging 10 times the medical aid rates or 4 times the medical aid rate, to make sure that you've got that gap cover to allow you to allow a buffer for in-hospital expenses. So if you're on a medical aid, you can definitely use that to monitor and measure, how often have we been in hospital? How often do we need consultations?
Yeah.
How often do we need to go to therapy, etc.? But if you aren't on medical aid, please make sure you get onto it. But then you'll have to do a manual process of ensuring that you continuously monitor how often did we go, how much did it cost. And just as a rule of thumb, for a person who has got ordinary circumstances, we normally suggest that you have at least an emergency fund of 3 months worth of your expenses. But if you've got a child with disabilities or special needs, we say try and aim for an emergency fund worth at least 6 to 9 months of your monthly expenses.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that saving buffer, right, that you could need and how to structure it. Because that's usually a challenge for many families. What do you take as a percentage from your salary? How do you work that out structurally?
So I do have a fantastic model that I encourage my clients to use, and I call this the Penta rule. Under normal circumstances, all right, we would say allocate 50% of your income towards living expenses. Then 10% must be utilized for short-term goals such as an emergency fund. Then another 10% must be used for medium-term goals, for example, education funding. And here you should understand that the education funding for special needs or disability or children with disabilities is significantly higher. So you might have to actually increase that to maybe 15%. Then the next 10%, you must actually use that for what you call our long-term planning. So this can be things like retirement planning. It can be to renovate a home, even to ensure that the special needs child is progressively provided with the right kind of medical equipment in the home. And then another 10% you'd utilize for what we call larger than life things. So this is where we say, YOLO, you only live once. As much as you have this financial obligation and responsibility, live a little.
Sure.
Enjoy a holiday here and there, if obviously you can afford it, but still enjoy life in spite of the circumstances. Because what I found is when you have a child with special needs, sometimes you get so ingrained in looking after them, you forget about your own personal well-being, you forget about the well-being of siblings even, you forget that the other children in the household also need to be looked after, and they also need to have a normal experience or a close to normal experience in life. So 50% to expenses, living costs, 10% short-term goals like emergency funds, 10% medium-term goals, 10% to long-term goals like retirement planning, another 10% to living life, philanthropy, YOLO, and then another 10% towards debt management. So that can be a good guide, the Penta rule.
I really how you say YOLO. It's like, let's go for it. And, that aspect of fun is something that I'd like us to include, because I think when we do budget for children with disabilities, we think about the emergencies, and I think we've also emphasized a lot on that, but there are also kind of recreational things that you have to think about with children with disabilities. So the fun element is also something that you should also think about, Tsungai, but we'll speak about that after the break. Tsungai Masendeke is joining us, having a wonderful conversation here, tips on how we can get better in planning for children living with disabilities. Tsungai is a certified financial planner and director of IWCP Proventus. We'll continue the conversation after this short break.
Parlez-vous couramment le français? Êtes-vous passionné par la radio? Et êtes-vous qualifié pour travailler en Afrique du Sud? Envoyez-nous votre CV et votre 3 minutes démo en MP3 à @channelafrica.co.za pour avoir une chance de rejoindre la famille Channel Africa. Si vous n'avez pas de réponse après 14 jours, cela signifie que vous n'avez pas été retenu. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Hashtag on the move and connect with us.
How can you plan better financially if you have a special needs child or a child with special needs or living with a disability? That's the conversation we're having for today's Money Matters. Still joining us on this one is Tsungai Masendeke, Certified Financial Planner and Director at IWCP Proventus. Tsungai, you spoke a little bit about, adding the budget and making it broad, making sure that there are other things that can be taken care of. Particularly, I want to bring in another factor, right? You have a child who has special needs, but you have other children as well, able-bodied children. And it's so easy to take, the majority of the budget, think about the schooling that, your special needs child will be going to, the transportation, their medical care, but you also need to care for these other children. And not forgetting, you have to care for yourself as well. When you are creating these budgets and creating these systems, how do you assure that nobody is left behind within your finances, you included, not left behind as well?
I love your question. And the one thing I always do with my clients is I'm a stickler for details. So I have a line item for everything that money has to be allocated to. And the reason why I emphasize this important point is because you realize that it's the small holes that can sink a ship. Is that small unaccounted for expense that can eventually cause your entire financial plan or even your monthly income to then just get swept away. So it's important that you itemize each and every one of the expenses you could anticipate. So for example, if it's therapy for the child, it's there. It's a line item in your money management exercise. If it's pure swimming, you put it in there as a line item. If it's birthday gifts for the children when they go with their friends, put it in there as a line item. And I think this actually helps you to become conscientious of the allocations as well, to say, okay, I think I might be putting in a little bit more for my special needs child. Let me try to be a bit fairer as a parent and allocate more maybe to leisure or fun for the other children. So be a stickler for detail, have an itemized budget or money management exercise. And I think when we're talking about, looking at money coming in, there is a special grant that parents with children with disabilities can also apply for. So that again, it's not only you trying to stretch your money, you also get a little bit of help from the government to ensure that you also provide for all the children that you might have. So there is a special tax deduction. You'd have to complete what you call an ITR-DD form, and it has to be completed by a registered medical practitioner. And this 2,000 odd can also help alleviate the financial constraints to help you whilst you're doing that budgeting or money management exercise.
All right, this is so important, the things that you're highlighting. And you spoke a little bit about fun there. And when we speak about children living with disabilities, we always look at the stressful areas or maybe the challenges and the difficulties. But there's also that element of fun that every child has to have. And that also needs to be budgeted for. But maybe you can make that an inclusive experience for every child instead of separating the costs. Maybe do activities that also the child with the disability can engage in instead of separating the fun with the child with the disability.
Great suggestion there. And I think one thing I've also come to experience is as much as there is a child with a special need, they can also be included in the activities in the family so that they don't feel like they're separate from everyone else or that they cannot be included. But it also helps the other children become more compassionate, become caring, become patient, and be more loving, because all of a sudden you're including everyone and we have to grow together.
I love that. Just as a way also to self-care, I think parents who have children with disabilities forget that aspect of also budgeting for themselves. Taking care of children with disabilities is not easy. So also that additional cost can be managed, but you have to be clever about it, don't you?
You have to be clever with it. And I think another clever thing that I want to emphasize that our parents with children with special needs need to be mindful of is around risk management and estate planning. Please.
Okay.
Only 3 out of every 10 parents in South Africa currently have a will. It's a huge and gross negligent aspect of your financial plan if you don't have a will and you have got a child with special needs. It should actually be put into law that it is illegal. Because when you pass away, you knew the child's schedule, you understood what sort of medication they needed, how many hospital visits, etc.
Okay.
You pass away without a will, you haven't nominated an appropriate guardian, there's no trustee, what's supposed to happen? So it's important that as much as, yes, we look at now, it's important for us to also plan for our future. Look for guardians that would know the child, understand what they need. They have the patience, to also look after them. And you make provision for it. If a child is disabled and they're probably never going to become financially independent, plan for that. Ensure you've got enough life cover. If you pass away, there a couple of good companies that have got an insurance policy that enables your child's education to be paid in full up until maybe they finish their first degree. And if you've got a child with disabilities, that premium is even increased to 150% of what would be considered for a normal child. So put in place those risk mitigation processes to make sure that if you're no longer available to look after your child, you've put in appropriate measures to ensure that those taking over will not be stranded. The other important thing I also want to emphasize in the estate planning is making sure that you also include what we call a special trust for children with special needs. So what a special trust does is, if you pass away, instead of nominating this child with the disabilities as a beneficiary, and they're probably incapacitated in looking after the wealth anyway, you actually appoint a trustee, but the tax benefits of a special trust enable the sustainability of the money, the funds, the resources, the assets you're leaving for this child with special needs. So it's quite key. Please, 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 I beg you, can we do the right thing? Yes, it's important to be in the moment, to live for now, but also let's be smart and plan for death.
I love that, Tsungai. It's such important conversations that we're having because, there's so many people out there who are not really sure how to manage their finances in general. And even more so if you have, a child with special needs in the family that may require much more planning than usual. Well, we'll leave it there. Let us know where we can go to find you online. And of course, I think more than anything, it's important if we don't have the, resources to understand how to navigate or how to implement some of the advice you gave us today, that we can be in search of a financial planner who can take us through and hold our hand step by step. If that is you, let us know where we can find you.
That is definitely me. So people can find me on tsungai.masendeke at liblink.co.za. They can also send me a message on LinkedIn. It's Tsungai Masendeke. And if you're brave enough, feel free to WhatsApp me on 073-519-2358.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat to you, Tsungai. You make speaking about money so much more fun, especially with your bubbly energy. So we appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you so much for having me and have a beautiful day further.
Have an incredible day. That's Certified Financial Planner and Director at IWCP Proventus, Tsungai Masendeke, helping us get tips on how we can plan better for your children who live with disabilities or have special needs. Great conversation there. Let us know what you think at Channel Africa 1 on social media. It's almost 11:30. Let's get once again our latest sports news.